Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're traveling to one of history's most legendary civilizations. Ancient Rome. The empire that conquered the known world, built roads that still exist today, and created a legacy that shaped Western civilization. But forget the marble statues and triumphant arches you see in movies. We're not talking about emperors in purple robes or gladiators in gleaming armor. We're talking about what daily life was actually like for ordinary Romans. And trust me, you wouldn't have lasted a day. So before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Dim the lights, settle in, and let the story carry you away. If you enjoy these journeys through history, consider subscribing. But only if it feels right. And if you'd like, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining me on these late-night explorations. Now, let's step back. Back to the year 150 AD. You're about to wake up in Rome. The Eternal City. And it's nothing like you imagined. Congratulations. You've just opened your eyes in ancient Rome. The good news. You're alive. The bad news. You're not a wealthy patrician in a villa. You're a pleb. An ordinary Roman. And you live in an insula. An insula is a multi-story apartment building. Think of it as Rome's version of a tenement. These buildings were cheaply constructed, poorly maintained, and extremely dangerous. They were made mostly of wood and brick, packed tightly together in narrow streets. Fires were constant. Collapses were common. People died in these buildings all the time. You're on the third or fourth floor. Not because you wanted a view, but because rent was cheaper the higher you went. The ground floors were reserved for shops and wealthier tenants who could afford the convenience. You got the cramped, airless box at the top of a creaky staircase. Your room is tiny. Maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. There's a narrow bed, a wooden chest, maybe a small table. No kitchen. No running water. No bathroom. And definitely no windows worth mentioning, just a small opening that lets in a sliver of light and a lot of street noise. The smell hits you immediately. Smoke from cooking fires, human waste from the street below, and the general funk of thousands of people living on top of each other in a city with questionable sanitation. Welcome to Rome. You pull yourself out of bed. The mattress is a thin layer of straw or reeds over wooden slats. No springs, no padding, just enough to keep you off the hard surface. Your back aches. Your neck is stiff. And you're already sweating because it's summer in Rome, and there's no air conditioning. Just heat, trapped in a wooden box. You're wearing a tunic. That's it. One piece of clothing that you've been wearing for days because washing clothes is a hassle and you don't have many. It's stained, it smells, and it's starting to fall apart at the seams. But it's all you've got, now you need to use the bathroom. And this is where things get truly Roman. You don't have a toilet in your insula. Most people don't. So you have two options. 1. Use a chamber pot and then carry it down several flights of stairs to dump it in the street. Or 2. Head to the public latrine. Let's talk about public latrines. Because Roman toilets were an experience. The latrine is a large room with stone benches lining the walls. The benches have holes cut into them. No partitions, no stalls, no doors. Just holes. You sit down next to a dozen other Romans, all doing their business at the same time. There's no toilet paper. Instead, there's a communal sponge on a stick called a tersorium. Yes, communal. Everyone uses the same sponge. You dip it in a channel of running water, use it, rinse it, and leave it for the next person. If you're lucky, the water is clean. If you're not, well, diseases spread fast. The smell is overwhelming. Human waste, yes, but also the sharp tang of urine because Romans collected urine for use in tanning leather and cleaning clothes. Public urinals were stationed throughout the city, and people would stop and contribute. It was considered civic duty. So you finish your business, rinse the sponge, and head back to the street. You haven't eaten yet. You're already exhausted. And your day has barely started. Breakfast isn't happening. Not a real one, anyway. Most Romans, especially the poor, didn't eat much in the morning. Maybe a piece of stale bread if you have it. Maybe some cheap wine mixed with water. That's about it. If you want something more, you'll need to buy it from a street vendor. Thermopolia, they're called. Little food stalls built into the sides of buildings. They sell hot food, porridge, lentils, cheap stews. It's not gourmet. It's fuel. And it's expensive relative to what you earn. You grab a bowl of something vaguely edible. It's lukewarm, greasy, and tastes like it's been sitting out for hours. Because it has. But it fills your stomach, and that's all that matters. You wash it down with pasca, a sour wine that's more vinegar than alcohol. It's what soldiers drink. It's what poor people drink. It's all you can afford. And now, it's time to work. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And in Rome, survival is a full-time job. Work in ancient Rome depends on what you do. If you're a laborer, and most Romans are, you're doing backbreaking physical work for barely enough money to survive. Construction, hauling goods, loading ships at the docks. 12-hour days under the Mediterranean sun with no breaks, no safety equipment, and no workers' rights. If you're a craftsman, maybe a potter or a blacksmith, you've got it slightly better. You work in a shop, probably on the ground floor of someone's insula. You make things, sell them, and hope you earn enough to pay rent and buy food. But competition is fierce, and one bad month can ruin you. If you're unlucky enough to be a slave, and about a third of Rome's population is enslaved, you have no rights at all. Your property. You work wherever your owner tells you to work. You sleep wherever they let you sleep. And you do it until you're too old or too broken to be useful anymore. Let's say you're a laborer today. You're working on a construction project. Rome is always building something. Aqueducts, temples, public baths, new insulae. The city is growing, and that means constant work for people willing to break their backs. You spend the morning hauling stones. Heavy stones. Limestone, marble, travertine. These materials are shipped in from quarries outside the city, and someone has to move them from the docks to the construction site. That someone is you. There are no forklifts, no cranes, no machinery. Just ropes, wooden poles, and human muscle. You and a dozen other men lift a block that weighs hundreds of pounds. Your hands are raw. Your shoulders scream. Your legs shake. But you keep going because if you stop, you don't get paid. The sun is brutal. It's midday now, and the temperature is well over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. There's no shade. No water breaks. Just heat radiating off the stone and dirt. Men collapse from exhaustion. Some die from heatstroke. Their bodies are dragged aside, and work continues. You're sweating through your tunic. Your skin is burned. Your throat is dry. But you keep lifting. Keep hauling. Keep moving. Because stopping means losing your job. And losing your job means starving. Finally, the foreman calls a break. It's past midday, and even he knows that dead workers are bad for productivity. You collapse in whatever shade you can find. Someone passes around a skin of water. It's warm and tastes like leather, but you drink it anyway. Lunch, if you can call it that, is whatever you brought with you. Maybe some bread. Maybe some cheese if you're lucky. You eat quickly because the break is short. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Then it's back to work. The afternoon is worse than the morning. The heat intensifies. Your body is already exhausted. But the work doesn't stop. More stones. More hauling. More lifting. Your muscles are screaming. Your hands are bleeding. But you push through because you have to. By the time the sun starts to set, you're barely standing. Your clothes are soaked with sweat and covered in dust. Your body aches in ways you didn't know were possible. But the day is finally over. You're paid a few coins. Barely enough to cover rent and food. Not enough to save. Not enough to get ahead. Just enough to survive another day. And now you have to walk back to your insula. Through crowded streets filled with people, carts, animals, and filth. Rome doesn't have sidewalks. Pedestrians and traffic share the same narrow roads. You dodge a cart pulled by oxen. You step over a pile of garbage. You try not to breathe too deeply because the smell is overwhelming. Street vendors are everywhere. Selling food, selling trinkets, selling anything they can. People are shouting, arguing, laughing. The noise is constant. Rome never sleeps. Even at night, the city hums with activity. You finally reach your insula and climb the stairs to your room. Your legs are lead. Your lungs burn. By the time you reach your floor, you're gasping for air. You push open the door to your tiny room and collapse onto your bed. But you're not done yet. You're starving. And you need to eat something. So you drag yourself back down the stairs and head to the nearest thermopolium. You buy a bowl of lentil stew. It's cheap, it's bland, and it's probably been sitting out for hours. But it's food. You eat it standing in the street because there's nowhere to sit. The stew sits heavy in your stomach. It's not enough to feel full, but it's enough to stop the hunger pangs. You finish it quickly and head back to your room. Climbing those stairs again feels like a punishment. But you make it. You collapse onto your bed. And you lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how you're going to do this all over again tomorrow. Because tomorrow will be the same. The same work. The same heat. The same exhaustion. The same struggle to survive. Day after day after day. This is life in Rome for ordinary people. No glory. No grandeur. Just survival. But the day isn't over yet. Because before you can sleep, you need to deal with the reality of living in an ancient city. And that reality is dangerous, uncomfortable, and often disgusting. Living in an insula means dealing with some seriously unpleasant realities. And one of the worst is what happens at night. See, most people don't want to navigate dark stairwells in the middle of the night just to use a public latrine. So they use chamber pots. Clay pots that sit in the corner of their room, collecting urine and feces until morning. And in the morning, what do you think happens to all that waste? Some people carry it down to dump in designated areas. But a lot of people, they just open their window and throw it into the street below. No warning. No looking first. Just a cascade of human waste falling from upper-story windows. If you're walking through Roman streets, you learn to stay alert. You listen for the sound of shutters opening above. You watch for shadows. Because getting hit with a chamber pot's contents is not just disgusting, it's genuinely dangerous. That waste carries disease. And in a city as densely packed as Rome, disease spreads fast. The streets themselves are filthy. Garbage piles up in corners. Dead animals rot where they fall. Sewage runs in open channels. Rome has the cloaca maxima, the great sewer, but it doesn't reach everywhere. Most streets just accumulate filth until rain washes it away or someone bothers to clean it up, which isn't often. Rats are everywhere. They scurry through the garbage, slip through cracks in buildings, and nest wherever they can find shelter. No one thinks much of them. They're just part of city life. What people don't realize is that these rats carry fleas, and those fleas carry disease. Typhus. Plague. Illnesses that will kill thousands. And then there's fire. Remember, your insula is made mostly of wood. And everyone cooks with open flames. Oil lamps provide light. Braziers provide heat. One spark, one moment of carelessness, and an entire building can go up in flames. Fire spreads fast in Rome. Buildings are packed so close together that flames jump from one to the next. And when a fire starts on an upper floor, people trapped above have nowhere to go. They either burn to death or jump and hope they survive the fall. Most don't. The city has a fire brigade called the vigiles. But they're not always effective. By the time they arrive, buildings are often fully engulfed. They focus on stopping the spread rather than saving the structure. If your insulae catches fire, you're probably losing everything you own. If you're lucky, you escape with your life. But let's say you survive the night without getting doused in chamber pot contents or burned alive. Morning comes again. And you face the same question. How do you stay clean? Romans are actually pretty obsessed with bathing. The city has public bathhouses, thermae, scattered throughout. And they're open to everyone. Rich, poor, slave, free. For a small fee, you can spend hours soaking in hot water, getting clean, socializing. The baths are one of the few places where Roman society mixes. You'll see wealthy merchants sitting next to day laborers. Senators chatting with shopkeepers. It's a social hub as much as a place to wash. You pay your few coins and head inside. The bath complex has several rooms. First, the apoditorium, where you leave your clothes. There are no lockers, no security. You just hope no one steals your stuff while you're bathing. Spoiler, theft is common. Then you move through progressively hotter rooms. The tepidarium is warm. The caldarium is hot, heated by a hypocaust system that channels hot air under the floor. You sit in pools of water, sweating out the day's grime. It actually feels incredible after a long day of manual labor. But here's the catch. Everyone bathes in the same water. The pools aren't drained and refilled between bathers. Hundreds of people use the same water throughout the day. By afternoon, you're essentially bathing in other people's sweat and dirt. It's not exactly hygienic, but it's better than not bathing at all. There's also an olive oil situation. Romans don't use soap. Instead, they coat their skin in olive oil, then scrape it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. The oil lifts dirt and dead skin. You scrape it all off, and theoretically, you're clean. In practice, you're just oily and slightly less dirty. After the hot rooms, you head to the frigidarium, a cold pool. The shock of cold water after the heat is supposed to be invigorating. Mostly it's just shocking. But Romans swear by it. They believe it's good for health and circulation. You spend a couple hours at the baths. It's one of the few pleasures available to ordinary Romans. You chat with other bathers. You hear the latest gossip. Who's in trouble with the authorities? Which shop got robbed? Who's sleeping with whose wife? The baths are where information flows. Eventually, you drag yourself out, retrieve your clothes if they're still there, and head back into the chaos of the city. You're cleaner than you were. But you're heading right back into the dirt and grime of Roman streets. Within an hour, you'll be covered in dust and sweat again. But at least you had a moment of relief. And that's the pattern of life here. Brief moments of comfort surrounded by constant discomfort, danger, and struggle. You work yourself to exhaustion just to afford the bare minimum. You live in a building that could collapse or burn down at any moment. You navigate streets filled with waste and crime. And you do it all over again the next day because you don't have a choice. This is Rome. Not the Rome of monuments and glory. The Rome of survival. And it's a lot harder than the history books let on. Let's talk about food for a moment. Because eating in ancient Rome, unless you're wealthy, is an exercise in making do with very little. Most ordinary Romans don't have kitchens. Cooking in your insular room is technically illegal because of fire risk, though plenty of people do it anyway with small braziers. But it's dangerous and the landlords don't like it. So where do you get your meals? Street food, mostly. Those thermopolia we mentioned. But also the markets. Rome has several large markets where vendors sell everything from vegetables to fish to questionable meat products. The Forum Boarium is the cattle market. The Forum Holatorium is for vegetables. You wander through, looking for something affordable. Bread is the staple. Everyone eats bread. The government actually provides free grain to Roman citizens through a program called the grain dole. It's basically welfare, designed to keep the masses from rioting. You line up, show proof of citizenship, and receive your monthly allotment of grain. Then you take it to a baker who mills it and bakes it for a small fee. The bread isn't great. It's coarse, dense, and often contains bits of stone from the grinding process. Over time, this wears down your teeth. By age 30, your teeth are ground down to nubs. By 40, if you're still alive, you're probably missing half of them. Dental hygiene isn't really a thing, and there are no dentists to help. If you want protein, you're looking at salted fish or cheap cuts of meat. Fresh fish is expensive and spoils quickly in the heat. So most of what's available is preserved in salt. It's tough, it's salty, and it's not particularly appetizing. But it keeps, and that's what matters. Meat is a luxury. Pork, chicken, sometimes beef if you can afford it. But most Romans rarely eat meat. It's reserved for festivals or special occasions. The rest of the time, you're eating beans, lentils, porridge made from grain, and whatever vegetables are cheap at the market. Wine is everywhere, though. Everyone drinks wine. Even children. But not the good stuff. The wine available to ordinary people is harsh, acidic, and often mixed with water to make it go further. Pasca, that vinegar wine we mentioned earlier, is what soldiers and workers drink. It's not pleasant, but it's safer than drinking water. See, Rome's water supply is actually pretty good. The aqueducts bring fresh water from distant springs into the city. Public fountains flow continuously, and anyone can fill a jug. But not everyone trusts it. And in poorer neighborhoods, the water from public fountains can be contaminated by the filth in the streets. So wine is often the safer bet. By late afternoon, you're exhausted from work, you've eaten something barely adequate, and you're trying to figure out how to spend the few hours before nightfall. Because once the sun goes down, Rome becomes a very different place. At night, the city transforms. During the day, heavy carts are banned from the streets. Too much traffic, too much congestion. But at night, after the 10th hour, the carts are allowed in. Hundreds of them. Hauling goods, making deliveries, rattling over cobblestones with a noise that makes sleep nearly impossible. If you live near a main road, you're not sleeping. You're lying in your bed listening to the endless rumble of wooden wheels on stone, the shouts of cart drivers, the cracking of whips. It goes on all night. Every night. You get used to it, sort of, but it never really stops bothering you. And then there's crime. Rome at night is dangerous. There are no street lights except for the occasional torch outside a wealthy person's home. The narrow alleys are pitch black. And they're full of people who want what you have, even if what you have isn't much. Muggers work the dark streets. They target anyone walking alone. Sometimes they just want your money. Sometimes they want your clothes. Sometimes they want to hurt you for the fun of it. You learn to move quickly, stay in groups if possible, and avoid certain neighborhoods entirely after dark. The vigiles patrol at night. They're supposed to maintain order and watch for fires. But there aren't enough of them, and they can't be everywhere. If you get into trouble in a dark alley, you're on your own. Screaming for help might bring someone running. It might also bring more attackers. You just never know. So most people stay inside after sunset. They lock their flimsy doors, pile furniture against them if they're worried, and hope for the best. You lie in your bed, listening to the carts rumble past, listening to the shouts and occasional screams from the street below, and you wait for morning. Sleep doesn't come easy. Your room is hot and airless. Your bed is uncomfortable. The noise is constant. And you're stressed about tomorrow because tomorrow means another day of brutal work, another day of barely scraping by, another day of surviving in a city that doesn't care if you live or die. But you drift off eventually because your body is too exhausted to stay awake. And you sleep fitfully, waking multiple times throughout the night. Sometimes because of the noise. Sometimes because of the heat. Sometimes because you heard something suspicious and you're not sure if someone's trying to break into your room. And then, before you know it, it's morning again. The sun rises. The city wakes up. The carts stop. The day shift begins. And you drag yourself out of bed to do it all over again. Work, eat, survive. That's the cycle. Day after day, week after week, year after year. This is what it means to be an ordinary person in ancient Rome. You're not conquering empires. You're not debating philosophy in marble halls. You're just trying to make it through another day without starving, getting robbed, or dying in a fire. And honestly, most people don't make it to old age. Disease takes them. Accidents take them. Exhaustion takes them. Rome is a city built on the backs of people who work themselves to death so that a tiny elite can live in luxury. That's the reality. That's the empire, but let's talk about the few hours you do manage to grab between sunset and sunrise. Because sleep in ancient Rome isn't rest. It's survival mode with your eyes closed. Your insular room has no soundproofing. None. The walls are thin wood and plaster. You can hear your neighbors' conversations, their arguments, their intimate moments, their bowel movements. Everything. There's no privacy, not even the illusion of it. And then there's the smell. Your room doesn't have ventilation beyond that one tiny window. So you're breathing in the accumulated odors of cooking, unwashed bodies, chamber pots, and whatever's rotting in the street below. In summer, it's suffocating. You're lying there, gasping for air, sweating through your tunic, listening to the symphony of urban chaos outside. If you live near a main road, you're not sleeping. You're lying in your bed listening to the endless rumble of wooden wheels on stone, the shouts of cart drivers, the cracking of whips. It goes on all night. Every night. You get used to it, sort of, but it never really stops bothering you. And then there's crime. Rome at night is dangerous. There are no street lights except for the occasional torch outside a wealthy person's home. The narrow alleys are pitch black. And they're full of people who want what you have, even if what you have isn't much. Muggers work the dark streets. They target anyone walking alone. Sometimes they just want your money. Sometimes they want your clothes. Sometimes they want to hurt you for the fun of it. You learn to move quickly, stay in groups if possible, and avoid certain neighborhoods entirely after dark. The vigiles patrol at night. They're supposed to maintain order and watch for fires. But there aren't enough of them, and they can't be everywhere. If you get into trouble in a dark alley, you're on your own. Screaming for help might bring someone running. It might also bring more attackers. You just never know. So most people stay inside after sunset. They lock their flimsy doors, pile furniture against them if they're worried, and hope for the best. You lie in your bed, listening to the carts rumble past, listening to the shouts and occasional screams from the street below, and you wait for morning. Sleep doesn't come easy. Your room is hot and airless. Your bed is uncomfortable. The noise is constant. And you're stressed about tomorrow because tomorrow means another day of brutal work, another day of barely scraping by, another day of surviving in a city that doesn't care if you live or die. But you drift off eventually because your body is too exhausted to stay awake. And you sleep fitfully, waking multiple times throughout the night. Sometimes because of the noise. Sometimes because of the heat. Sometimes because you heard something suspicious and you're not sure if someone's trying to break into your room. And then, before you know it, it's morning again. The sun rises. The city wakes up. The carts stop. The day's shift begins. And you drag yourself out of bed to do it all over again. Work, eat, survive. That's the cycle. Day after day, week after week, year after year. This is what it means to be an ordinary person in ancient Rome. You're not conquering empires. You're not debating philosophy in marble halls. You're just trying to make it through another day without starving, getting robbed, or dying in a fire. And honestly, most people don't make it to old age. Disease takes them. Accidents take them. Exhaustion takes them. Rome is a city built on the backs of people who work themselves to death so that a tiny elite can live in luxury. That's the reality. That's the empire, but let's talk about the few hours you do manage to grab between sunset and sunrise. Because sleep in ancient Rome isn't rest. It's survival mode with your eyes closed. Your insular room has no soundproofing. None. The walls are thin wood and plaster. You can hear your neighbors' conversations, their arguments, their intimate moments, their bowel movements. Everything. There's no privacy, not even the illusion of it. And then there's the smell. Your room doesn't have ventilation beyond that one tiny window. So you're breathing in the accumulated odors of cooking, unwashed bodies, chamber pots, and whatever's rotting in the street below. In summer, it's suffocating. You're lying there, gasping for air, sweating through your tunic, listening to the symphony of urban chaos outside. If you live near a main road, you're not sleeping. You're lying in your bed listening to the endless rumble of wooden wheels on stone, the shouts of cart drivers, the cracking of whips. It goes on all night. Every night. You get used to it, sort of, but it never really stops bothering you. And then there's crime. Rome at night is dangerous. There are no street lights except for the occasional torch outside a wealthy person's home. The narrow alleys are pitch black. And they're full of people who want what you have, even if what you have isn't much. Muggers work the dark streets. They target anyone walking alone. Sometimes they just want your money. Sometimes they want your clothes. Sometimes they want to hurt you for the fun of it. You learn to move quickly, stay in groups if possible, and avoid certain neighborhoods entirely after dark. The vigilas patrol at night. They're supposed to maintain order and watch for fires. But there aren't enough of them, and they can't be everywhere. If you get into trouble in a dark alley, you're on your own. Screaming for help might bring someone running. It might also bring more attackers. You just never know. So most people stay inside after sunset. They lock their flimsy doors, pile furniture against them if they're worried, and hope for the best. You lie in your bed, listening to the carts rumble past, listening to the shouts and occasional screams from the street below, and you wait for morning. Sleep doesn't come easy. Your room is hot and airless. Your bed is uncomfortable. The noise is constant. And you're stressed about tomorrow because tomorrow means another day of brutal work, another day of barely scraping by, another day of surviving in a city that doesn't care if you live or die. But you drift off eventually because your body is too exhausted to stay awake. And you sleep fitfully, waking multiple times throughout the night. Sometimes because of the noise. Sometimes because of the heat. Sometimes because you heard something suspicious and you're not sure if someone's trying to break into your room, and then, before you know it, it's morning again. The sun rises. The city wakes up. The carts stop. The day's shift begins. And you drag yourself out of bed to do it all over again. Work, eat, survive. That's the cycle. Day after day, week after week, year after year. This is what it means to be an ordinary person in ancient Rome. You're not conquering empires. You're not debating philosophy in marble halls. You're just trying to make it through another day without starving, getting robbed, or dying in a fire. And honestly, most people don't make it to old age. Disease takes them. Accidents take them. Exhaustion takes them. Rome is a city built on the backs of people who work themselves to death so that a tiny elite can live in luxury. That's the reality. That's the empire. So you've survived the night. Barely. Now comes the next challenge, eating. And in ancient Rome, food isn't just about taste or nutrition. It's about survival. It's about knowing where to get it, how to afford it, and how to avoid getting poisoned by it. Let's start with the basics. If you're poor, which you probably are, your diet is incredibly monotonous. Grain. That's it. That's your whole life. Specifically, wheat or barley, ground into flour and mixed with water to make a thick porridge called pulse. It's bland. It's heavy. It fills your stomach just enough to keep you working. But it's not satisfying. It's not enjoyable. It's just fuel. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you might get some bread instead. Rome has bakeries scattered throughout the city, and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the streets is one of the few pleasant sensory experiences you'll have. But bread costs money. And if you're scraping by on day wages, you're probably sticking with the porridge. Meat? Forget it. Unless it's a festival day or you've somehow come into extra money, you're not eating meat. The occasional bit of salted fish, maybe. Or if you're really desperate, some questionable sausage from a street vendor that might contain God's know what. Probably better not to ask. Vegetables are more accessible but still expensive. Onions, garlic, lentils, beans. These show up in your diet when you can afford them. They add some variety to the endless grain, but they're not enough to constitute a real meal. You're always hungry. Always. Your stomach is never truly full. It's just less empty than it was an hour ago. The wealthy, of course, eat like kings. They have elaborate multi-course dinners with roasted meats, exotic fruits, imported spices, fine wines. They recline on couches while slaves serve them course after course. Meanwhile, you're in your insular room, spooning cold porridge into your mouth and trying not to think about how unfair it all is. Water is another issue. You can't just turn on a tap. You have to go to the public fountain, wait in line with dozens of other people, fill your jug, and carry it back to your room. And the water quality? Questionable at best. The aqueducts bring water from outside the city, which sounds impressive until you realize that by the time it reaches your neighborhood, it's been sitting in lead pipes and open channels where people wash, animals drink, and who knows what else happens. So you drink wine. Not because you're fancy. Not because you're celebrating. But because watered-down wine is safer than plain water. It's acidic enough to kill some of the bacteria. So you mix cheap, sour wine with water and drink that instead. It doesn't taste good. But it probably won't kill you. Probably. Food shopping is an adventure. You go to the market, which is crowded, loud, and full of people trying to cheat you. Merchants shout their prices, each one claiming their goods are the freshest, the best quality. But you've learned to be skeptical. That fish might look fresh, but it's probably been sitting in the sun for hours. That bread might seem like a bargain, but it's probably made with flour that's half sawdust. You haggle. You argue. You walk away and come back. You develop relationships with certain vendors who you trust, or at least trust more than the others. And even then, you're constantly checking weights, inspecting goods, making sure you're not being swindled. And let's talk about food poisoning. Because it's common. Very common. With no refrigeration, no food safety standards, no health inspections, you're basically rolling the dice every time you eat something. That meat that tasted a little off. Congratulations, you're about to spend the next 3 days violently ill, unable to work, losing precious income. There's also the matter of hunger. Real, gnawing hunger. The kind that keeps you awake at night. The kind that makes your hands shake and your vision blur. Because some days, there just isn't enough money for food. Some days, you go to bed having eaten nothing but a handful of stale bread. And you lie there, stomach cramping, trying to ignore the pain. The government provides grain doles to Roman citizens. Free wheat, distributed to keep the masses from rioting. It's not much, but it's something. A survival net that prevents complete starvation. But the lines are long, the process is bureaucratic, and the grain itself is often poor quality. Still, you take it. Because the alternative is worse. Eating in ancient Rome isn't a pleasure. It's not a social experience, not for you anyway. It's a chore. A necessity. A constant battle against hunger, poor quality, and an economy designed to keep you desperate. You eat to survive. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again that you've made it through another day of work. You've managed to find some food. You've survived the night without being robbed or burned alive. But now comes the real killer in ancient Rome. Disease. Let's be clear about something. Modern medicine doesn't exist. Germ theory doesn't exist. The concept that invisible tiny organisms can make you sick. That won't be discovered for another 1800 years. So when you get sick in ancient Rome, and you will get sick, no one has any idea what's actually wrong with you. The prevailing medical theory is based on the four humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to Roman doctors, illness happens when these humors become imbalanced. The treatment? Bloodletting. Purging. Induced vomiting. Essentially, they're going to drain fluids from your body until either the illness goes away or you die. Often, it's the latter. Got a fever? They'll cut your arm and drain some blood. Stomach problems? Here, drink this mixture that will make you vomit for hours. Headache? More bloodletting. The Roman approach to medicine can essentially be summed up as, let's remove stuff from your body and hope that helps. Now, there are some competent doctors in Rome. Galen, for instance, is doing groundbreaking work. But he's treating emperors and wealthy aristocrats. You get the local physician who learned his trade from watching someone else guess at treatments. Or worse, you get the street healer who's selling snake oil and claiming it cures everything. And the diseases themselves are everywhere. Malaria is endemic. The mosquitoes breeding in the marshes around Rome carry it, and there's no quinine, no treatment, nothing. You either survive it or you don't. Tuberculosis is common. So is typhoid. So are various intestinal parasites from the contaminated water. Speaking of water, let's talk about lead poisoning. Because those beautiful Roman aqueducts, they're lined with lead. The pipes bringing water into wealthy homes. Lead. The cups the wealthy drink from. Lead. There's so much lead in the Roman water system that historians debate whether chronic lead poisoning might have contributed to the empire's eventual decline. But you're not wealthy enough to have piped water, so you're drinking from public fountains. Which means you're also getting whatever parasites and bacteria are floating in that water. Dysentery is a constant threat. You've probably had it multiple times. The dehydration, the cramping, the constant trips to the latrine. It's miserable. And for many people, especially children and the elderly, it's fatal. Then there are the epidemic diseases. Plague sweeps through Rome periodically. Not the Black Death, that's still centuries away, but various other epidemic diseases that kill thousands. When plague hits, there's nothing anyone can do. The streets fill with bodies. The funeral pyres burn day and night. And you just pray to whatever gods might be listening that you're not next. Smallpox is another killer. If you survive it, you're left scarred and possibly blind. Measles, mumps, various fevers. The city is a breeding ground for disease. Dense population, poor sanitation, no understanding of contagion. It's the perfect environment for epidemics. And don't even think about surgery. If you need an operation, you're being held down while someone cuts into you with no anesthesia. The pain is unimaginable. And even if you survive the procedure, infection will probably kill you anyway. There are no sterile instruments. No antibiotics. No understanding that the unwashed hands of your surgeon are introducing deadly bacteria into your wound. Childbirth is particularly dangerous. Many women die in labor or from infections afterward. The infant mortality rate is staggering. If you're born in ancient Rome, your chances of surviving to age 5 are about 50-50. And if you do make it to adulthood, your life expectancy is maybe 35 or 40 years if you're lucky. So you live with constant pain. That tooth that's rotting. You're just going to have to endure the agony until either it falls out on its own or you find someone willing to yank it out with pliers. That chronic cough. You'll have it for the rest of your life, however long that might be. That aching back from years of manual labor. There's no treatment. You just live with it. Death is everywhere. You see it constantly. Bodies being carried to funeral pyres. Children dying from fever. Old people, except there aren't many old people because most people don't live that long, succumbing to diseases that modern medicine could cure with a simple antibiotic. And when you die, if you're poor, there's no elaborate funeral. No marble tomb. Your body is burned on a communal pyre, or if your family can't afford that, you're dumped in a mass grave outside the city walls. No marker. No remembrance. You just disappear, one more anonymous person who lived and died in the greatest city in the world. This is ancient Rome. Not the Rome of legends and marble statues. Not the Rome of triumphant generals and philosophical debates. This is the Rome of ordinary people. The Rome of constant struggle, disease, death, and the grinding poverty that most people can never escape. You wouldn't last a day. Not really. Because the Rome that actually existed was brutal, diseased, dangerous, and utterly indifferent to your suffering. The empire wasn't built on glory. It was built on the broken bodies of millions of people whose names history never bothered to remember. Let's talk about one of the few genuinely pleasant aspects of Roman life. The baths. If there's anything that might make you think, okay, maybe ancient Rome wasn't completely terrible, it's the public baths. But even here, there are complications. The baths are one of Rome's great innovations. They're massive public complexes with hot rooms, warm rooms, cold rooms, swimming pools, exercise areas, and even libraries. And they're open to everyone. Rich, poor, citizens, slaves. For a small fee, sometimes just a fraction of a day's wage, you can spend hours soaking, socializing, and temporarily forgetting about your miserable existence. You arrive at the baths in the afternoon, because that's when they're open. Morning is for work. The baths are for after. You pay your entrance fee to the attendant and head inside. The noise hits you first. Hundreds of people talking, laughing, splashing. The baths are loud. They're social. They're the heart of Roman public life. First, you hit the exercise yard. Some people are wrestling. Others are lifting weights. There are ball games happening. You're not really interested in exercise, you got enough of that hauling cargo all day, but you watch for a bit. It's entertainment. Then you move into the bathing sequence. You start in the tepidarium, the warm room. It's pleasant. The temperature is comfortable. You're sweating out the grime of the day. Other bathers are chatting, discussing politics, business, gossip. The baths are where deals are made, where news spreads, where you learn what's actually happening in the city. Next is the caldarium, the hot room. This is heated by a hypocaust system, essentially an underfloor heating system where hot air from furnaces circulates beneath the floor and through the walls. It's ingenious. It's also incredibly hot. You're sweating profusely now. The steam is thick. You can barely see across the room. Some wealthy bathers have slaves scraping the sweat and dirt off their skin with curved metal tools called strigils. You don't have a slave, so you're doing it yourself. It's not comfortable. The strigil scrapes your skin raw, but it gets you clean. Sort of. Then comes the frigidarium, the cold room. After the intense heat, you plunge into a cold pool. The shock is intense. Your whole body tenses. But it's also invigorating. You feel alive. For a few moments, you forget about the hunger, the exhaustion, the constant stress of survival. But here's where things get less pleasant. The baths are crowded. Very crowded. You're bathing in water that hundreds of other people have used. The Romans don't understand bacteria. They change the water periodically, but not nearly often enough. You're essentially soaking in a warm soup of other people's dirt, sweat, and bodily fluids. Skin infections are common. Eye infections are common. Various fungal conditions spread easily in this environment. That rash you develop after visiting the baths? That's not just bad luck. That's the reality of sharing bathwater with half the neighborhood. And let's talk about the latrines. Because yes, the baths have public toilets. They're communal. Long stone benches with holes cut in them, positioned side by side. No privacy. No stalls. You're sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers, having a conversation while you defecate. This is normal. This is expected. There's a channel of running water beneath the seats that's supposed to carry waste away. And there's a trough of water in front where you can rinse the sponge on a stick that everyone shares for wiping. Yes, you read that correctly. Shared sponge. On a stick. This is Roman toilet paper. The smell is indescribable. Despite the running water, the latrines reek. And diseases spread easily here too. Parasites. Bacterial infections. You're in a room full of people's waste, and the sanitation is barely adequate. Still, you keep coming back. Because for all its flaws, the baths offer something precious. A few hours where you're not working. Where you're not hungry. Where you can relax, socialize, feel human. In a life defined by constant labor and survival, those few hours matter. You see all of society at the baths. Senators discussing politics. Merchants making deals. Laborers gossiping. Philosophers debating. It's a rare space where social hierarchies blur slightly. Everyone's naked. Everyone's bathing. For a moment, the desperate poverty of your daily life feels less crushing. But then you leave. You step back out into the streets. The temporary escape is over. The dirt, the noise, the hunger, they're all still there. The baths offered a brief reprieve, nothing more. Tomorrow, you'll be back to hauling cargo, back to your cramped room, back to the endless grind of survival. Because this is ancient Rome. The baths are wonderful, yes. But they're a tiny island of comfort in an ocean of hardship. You can soak in hot water all you want. It doesn't change the fact that you're poor, you're powerless, and your life is hard. The baths don't fix that. They just help you forget it for a few hours. And when those hours are over, reality comes rushing back. Because Rome doesn't care about you. The empire rolls on, built on the backs of millions of people just like you. People whose lives are defined by work, hunger, disease, and an early death. The baths are lovely. But they don't change the fundamental truth of Roman life for ordinary people. It's brutal. And it's unrelenting. Now let's talk about one of the things Rome is most famous for. Entertainment. Gladiatorial games. Chariot races. Theater. The spectacles that kept the masses distracted from their miserable lives. Because that's what they are. Distractions. Bread and circuses, as the saying goes. Keep the people fed and entertained, and they won't riot. The Circus Maximus is the largest structure in Rome. It holds over 150,000 people. That's more than most modern stadiums. And it's packed for chariot races. These aren't gentle sporting events. They're violent, dangerous, and people die regularly. But that's part of the appeal. You can't afford good seats. Those are reserved for the wealthy, the senators, the patricians who sit in shaded boxes with cushions and servants bringing them wine and food. You're up in the cheap seats, the top rows where the sun beats down mercilessly and you can barely see the action. But you're here because it's free. And because for a few hours, you get to forget about everything else. The races are intense. 4 teams, identified by colors. Blues, greens, reds, whites. People are fanatical about their teams. Riots have broken out over chariot racing. People have been killed in the streets over which color they support. It's not just entertainment. It's tribal identity. It's passion taken to a dangerous extreme. The chariots thunder around the track. 7 laps. The drivers are slaves or freedmen, risking their lives for glory and the chance at wealth. Crashes are common. Horses tangle. Chariots flip. Drivers are dragged. Sometimes they're killed right there on the track while the crowd roars. You're screaming along with everyone else. The violence, the speed, the danger. It's exhilarating. Then there's the Colosseum. The Flavian Amphitheater. Another massive structure, seating around 50,000 people. This is where the gladiatorial games happen. And despite what popular culture suggests, these aren't daily events. They're special occasions, funded by wealthy politicians trying to win public favor or celebrating military victories. When games do happen, you're there. Everyone's there. It's free entertainment, and it's spectacular in the most brutal way possible. The day starts with animal hunts. Exotic creatures from across the empire, lions, bears, elephants, brought to Rome and slaughtered for entertainment. Trained hunters fight them. Sometimes criminals are thrown in unarmed, sentenced to death by beast. The crowd loves it. Then come the executions. Around midday, when the upper classes have left for lunch, the lower classes watch as condemned criminals are killed in elaborate, theatrical ways. Crucifixions. Burnings. Reenactments of mythological deaths. A man might be dressed as Icarus and thrown from a height. Another might be cast as Hercules and burned alive. It's horrific. But you've become desensitized to violence. This is just another day in Rome. The main event is the gladiatorial combat. These fighters are slaves, prisoners of war, or occasionally volunteers desperate enough to risk death for money and fame. They're trained in special schools. They're valuable investments. Despite the popular image, gladiators don't die in every fight. They're too expensive to waste. But deaths do happen. And when they do, the crowd goes wild. You're watching 2 men fight to the death. Or maybe not to the death. Maybe the loser will be spared if the crowd or the sponsor shows mercy. The thumb gesture, though that's probably a myth. The actual signal for life or death is lost to history. But someone is making that decision. And you're part of the crowd screaming for blood or mercy, swept up in the moment. The skill is undeniable. These are trained fighters. But the underlying reality is grim. You're watching human beings kill each other for your entertainment. For most of history, people would find this horrifying. But in Rome, it's normal. It's expected. It's what civilization looks like. And here's the thing. You enjoy it. You're not proud of that fact, but you do. Because for a few hours, you're not thinking about your empty stomach or your aching back or the rent you can't pay. You're caught up in the spectacle. You're part of something larger. You're Roman. And this is what Romans do. There are also theatrical performances. Comedies, tragedies, mime shows. These are less violent but still popular. The theaters are smaller than the circus or amphitheater, but they're still impressive structures. And admission is usually free or very cheap. The performances are bawdy, crude, often sexually explicit. They mock politicians, make fun of social norms, push boundaries. It's release. It's laughter in a life that offers little to laugh about. Religious festivals also provide entertainment. Processions through the streets. Sacrifices at temples. Public feasts where food is distributed. These are community events, rare moments when social barriers break down slightly and everyone participates together. You get to eat meat, a rarity in your diet. You get to drink wine that hasn't been watered down to oblivion. For one day, you feel like a full participant in Roman society rather than a disposable laborer at its bottom. But then the festival ends. The games are over. The theater closes. You return to your insula, to your tiny room, to your daily grind. The entertainment was wonderful while it lasted. But it doesn't change anything fundamental about your life. You're still poor. You're still powerless. You're still one illness or accident away from destitution or death. The entertainment isn't really for you. It's a tool. A way to keep you pacified. A way to prevent revolution. Give the masses bread and circuses, and they'll endure anything. And it works. You might be miserable, but you're not rebelling. You're not organizing. You're waiting for the next games. The next race. The next distraction. This is Rome's genius. Not just its engineering or its military might. But its understanding that if you give people just enough food, just enough entertainment, just enough hope, they'll tolerate almost anything. And you, along with hundreds of thousands of others, prove that theory correct every single day. Let's talk about the foundation of the Roman economy. Slavery. Because if you think your life as a free Roman citizen is hard, and it is, at least you're not a slave. Though honestly, the line between your existence and theirs isn't as wide as you'd like to believe. Rome runs on slave labor. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 20 and 30% of the empire's population are slaves. That's millions of people. They work the farms, mine the ore, build the roads, serve in wealthy households, and do every job that Romans consider beneath them. Which is most jobs. Slavery in Rome isn't based on race. It's based on circumstance. You become a slave by being captured in war, by being born to slave parents, by being sold into slavery by your own family when they can't afford to feed you, or by falling into debt so deep that enslavement is the only way out. Anyone can become a slave. That's the terrifying part. One wrong turn, one military defeat, one financial disaster, and your property. As a free citizen, you see slaves everywhere. They're carrying goods through the streets. They're working in shops. They're attending to their masters in public. Some are in chains. Others walk freely but wear collars marking them as property. You've learned not to think too hard about it. Slavery is just how the world works. It's always been this way. Or at least, it's been this way for as long as anyone can remember. But let's be honest about your own position. You're technically free. But practically, you have almost no rights. You can't vote in any meaningful way. The wealthy control politics through patronage networks you'll never access. You can't afford legal representation if you get into trouble. You work for barely enough to survive. One bad month and you could end up in debt slavery yourself. The main difference between you and a slave is that you can theoretically leave. Theoretically. But where would you go? Back to some rural village where life is even harder. To another city where you know no one and have no connections. Freedom is an illusion when you're trapped by poverty. You're free to starve. Free to die in the streets. That's about it. Now, not all slaves have it equally bad. Household slaves, especially those in wealthy homes, might live relatively comfortable lives. They're fed regularly. They sleep indoors. Some are educated, trusted with important tasks, even managing their master's business affairs. These slaves might eventually buy their freedom or be granted it. They become freedmen, a class below citizens but above slaves. But most slaves aren't so lucky. Agricultural slaves work on vast estates, laboring in fields from dawn to dusk. They're beaten regularly, fed the minimum necessary to keep them working, housed in barracks that make your insular room look luxurious. Many die young from exhaustion, malnutrition, or punishment. Their lives are worth less than the tools they use. Mining slaves have it worst of all. Sent into tunnels to extract ore, they work in darkness, breathing toxic air, with cave-ins a constant threat. Few survive more than a few years. Mining is essentially a death sentence. And everyone knows it. When a slave is condemned to the mines, their family mourns them as if they're already dead. Because they essentially are. There's also sexual slavery. Female slaves have no bodily autonomy. Their masters can use them however they wish. Male slaves too. Children aren't exempt. This is simply accepted. Rape isn't even the right word because slaves aren't considered to have the right to consent or refuse. They're property. Objects. This is one of the darkest aspects of Roman society, and it's everywhere, normalized, barely remarked upon. As a poor free citizen, you might actually own a slave. One slave. Purchased or inherited. They do the domestic work you can't spare time for. Fetch water. Prepare food. Clean. It makes your life slightly easier. And it gives you someone to feel superior to. At least you're not them. At least you're free. This small distinction matters to you more than you'd admit. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Your slave might eat better than you do. If you're not feeding them adequately, they can't work. So you prioritize their meals over your own sometimes. They sleep in your room because you don't have another room. You work alongside them because you can't afford to not work. The power dynamic exists, absolutely. But it's not as clear-cut as in wealthy households where masters and slaves inhabit completely different worlds. Sometimes you wonder about rebellion. It has happened before. Spartacus, the gladiator who led a slave revolt decades ago, nearly brought Rome to its knees. The rebellion was eventually crushed, and 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way. A message. A warning. This is what happens when slaves forget their place. The possibility of mass slave rebellion terrifies the Roman elite. It's why punishments are so brutal. Why any hint of slave organization is crushed immediately. Why the law allows any Roman to punish any slave they encounter. The system maintains itself through constant, grinding violence and the threat of worse. You benefit from this system even though you're barely above it yourself. The slaves doing the hardest, most dangerous work means those jobs don't fall to you. The availability of slave labor keeps certain goods affordable. The existence of slavery makes your own poverty seem slightly less desperate. At least you're free. At least you're not property. You cling to this distinction like a life raft in a stormy sea. But deep down, you know the truth. You and the slaves, you're both fuel. Both expendable. Both ground down by an empire that values neither of you as human beings. The only real difference is the title. Free versus enslaved. And in practical terms, that distinction means less than anyone wants to admit. You're all just trying to survive. And most of you won't make it to old age. Free or enslaved, Rome consumes you all the same. Let's talk about the gods. Because in ancient Rome, religion isn't a private matter of personal faith. It's a public duty. A civic obligation. And it's everywhere, woven into every aspect of daily life. You can't escape it. And you wouldn't want to, because angering the gods means disaster. Rome has gods for everything. Jupiter, the king of the gods. Juno, his wife. Mars, god of war. Venus, goddess of love. Neptune, Minerva, Apollo, Diana. The list goes on and on. And that's just the major ones. There are also household gods, the Laras and Penates, who protect your home. Guardian spirits. Local deities. Gods imported from conquered territories. The Roman pantheon is crowded and constantly growing. Every day starts with a prayer. You stand before the small household shrine in your room, if you can afford one, or you simply face the direction of the nearest temple and offer a quick prayer. You ask the gods for protection, for good fortune, for health. You promise offerings if they help you. A small cake. Some wine. Whatever you can afford. Religion is transactional. You give to the gods, they give to you. That's how it works. Public religion is even more elaborate. There are state ceremonies constantly. Festivals honoring different gods throughout the year. Priests performing rituals at temples. Animal sacrifices. The wealthy sponsor these events, partly out of piety, partly to demonstrate their status and win public favor. You attend when you can. It's expected. It's what good Romans do. The sacrifices are public spectacles. A bull or sheep is brought to the temple, decorated with garlands. Priests perform the ritual, slaughtering the animal and examining its organs for signs from the gods. If the organs look good, the gods are pleased. If they look abnormal, that's a bad omen. The ceremony might need to be repeated. The gods are picky. They demand perfection. But here's the thing. You're not entirely sure you believe all of this. The educated elite, the philosophers, they openly question the literal existence of the gods. They talk about the gods as metaphors, as representations of natural forces or human virtues. But they still perform the rituals. Because religion is about maintaining social order, not personal belief. For you, though, belief is more straightforward. You've never had the luxury of philosophical doubt. You see the gods as real because what else would they be? When lightning strikes, that's Jupiter's anger. When the harvest is good, the gods are pleased. When disease sweeps through your neighborhood, someone has offended the divine. It's simple. It's comforting in a way. The world has rules. Actions have consequences. The gods are watching. But alongside official religion, there's superstition. And honestly, the line between the two is blurry. You believe in omens. A bird flying a certain direction. A dream about snakes. The pattern of oil in water. These signs matter. They tell you whether to take a journey, make a purchase, trust a person. You consult fortune tellers. Read horoscopes. Wear amulets for protection. You're terrified of curses. Magic is real in your worldview. Someone who wishes you harm can hire a witch to curse you. They write your name on a lead tablet, listing all the terrible things they want to happen to you, and bury it in a cemetery or throw it in a sacred spring. You've heard stories of people wasting away, businesses failing, relationships crumbling, all because of curses. So you wear protective charms. You perform counter-rituals. You're careful not to make enemies who might resort to magic. Ghosts are also real. The dead don't always rest peacefully. Those who died violently or weren't buried properly wander the earth. You've heard them at night. Strange sounds. Unexplained shadows. They're angry. Restless. Dangerous. You leave offerings at graves to appease them. You avoid cemeteries after dark. You don't speak ill of the dead because they might hear you and take revenge. Then there are foreign cults. Mystery religions from the East. The cult of Isis from Egypt. Mithraism from Persia. These offer something traditional Roman religion doesn't: personal salvation. The promise of a better afterlife. Traditional Roman religion is about this life, about maintaining the favor of the gods for practical benefits. But these mystery cults promise transformation. Initiation into secret knowledge. Eternal life. They're appealing, especially to people whose current lives are miserable. You're curious about them. You've heard whispers. Seen their temples. But joining would be expensive. The initiation fees are beyond your budget. And there's social risk. Some Romans view these foreign religions with suspicion. They're too secretive. Too different. Too focused on individual salvation rather than collective civic duty. Still, the appeal is undeniable. A promise that this life isn't all there is. That suffering has meaning. That something better waits beyond death. Christianity is starting to appear too, though it's still very much a fringe cult. Most Romans have barely heard of it. Those who have consider it bizarre. They worship a crucified criminal as a god. They refuse to honor the traditional gods. They hold secret meetings. They talk about the end of the world. It's weird. Possibly dangerous. The authorities occasionally crack down on them. But for now, they're too small to matter much. Just another strange Eastern cult among many. What you do know is that religion, in all its forms, is essential. Not just for your soul, assuming you have one and it survives death, but for daily survival. The gods must be honored. Omens must be heeded. Curses must be avoided. Ghosts must be appeased. This is practical knowledge. This is how you navigate a world that's fundamentally unpredictable and dangerous. You can't control whether you'll find work tomorrow. Whether disease will strike. Whether fire will consume your building. But you can pray. You can sacrifice. You can wear your amulet. You can avoid black cats and broken mirrors and all the other countless signs of bad luck. It gives you some small sense of agency in a life where you control almost nothing. And maybe it works. Or maybe it's just coincidence. But when you survive another day, you thank the gods. When disaster strikes, you assume you've done something wrong, offended someone, neglected some ritual. Either way, religion explains the world. It provides structure. It offers hope, however faint. In a life defined by hardship, that's worth something. That's worth everything, really. Because without the gods, without the belief that someone is watching, that your suffering means something, what would be the point? You'd just be struggling for nothing. And that's too bleak even for Rome. Now let's talk about one of the most terrifying aspects of life in ancient Rome. Fire. Because if disease doesn't kill you, if crime doesn't get you, if exhaustion doesn't finish you off, fire probably will. And in Rome, fire is everywhere. It's constant. It's inevitable. And when it comes, there's almost nothing you can do to stop it. Your insula is a tinderbox. Literally. It's made of wood, cheap plaster, and wishful thinking. The construction is shoddy because landlords cut every corner possible to maximize profit. The walls are thin. The support beams are inadequate. And everything is packed together so tightly that buildings are practically touching each other. When one catches fire, they all catch fire. And fire happens all the time. You cook on an open flame in your room. There's no kitchen. No fireplace. Just a small brazier or portable stove burning charcoal. One spark lands on your straw mattress, and suddenly your entire room is ablaze. One gust of wind knocks over an oil lamp, and the whole building goes up. It happens so fast you barely have time to react. You've seen it before. You've heard the screams in the middle of the night. Smelled the smoke. Watched people jumping from upper floors because the stairs are already engulfed in flames. Bodies in the street. Families destroyed. Everything someone owned, gone in minutes. And then, the next day, life goes on. Because this is normal. This is Rome. The vigiles are supposed to fight fires. They're essentially a combination of police and firefighters. They patrol at night with buckets, hooks, and pumps. But they're understaffed and under-equipped. By the time they arrive, the fire has usually spread too far. They focus on creating fire breaks, tearing down adjacent buildings to stop the flames from spreading further. Which means if your building is next to the one on fire, they might just demolish yours to save the rest of the block. You lose everything either way. There's no insurance. No government assistance. When your building burns down, you're on your own. If you're lucky, you escape with your life and maybe a few possessions. Most people aren't that lucky. They lose everything. Their clothes. Their tools. Their savings, if they had any. And then they're homeless, sleeping in the streets, begging for charity that rarely comes. The wealthy have it better, of course. Their homes are built of stone and brick. They have courtyards that act as natural fire breaks. They have enough space between buildings that fire doesn't spread as easily. And they have resources to rebuild if disaster strikes. But you're in a wooden tower packed with hundreds of other desperate people, all of you one careless moment away from incineration. And it's not just accidental fires you worry about. Arson is common. Landlords sometimes burn their own buildings to collect on debts or clear land for new construction. Criminals set fires as distractions while they loot other areas. Political enemies torch each other's properties. Fire is a weapon as much as it is a hazard. You live with constant anxiety. Every time you light your cooking fire, you're careful. You check it multiple times before sleeping. You keep a bucket of water nearby. You know which window you'd jump from if you had to. You've planned your escape route. Because it's not a matter of if there's a fire. It's a matter of when. And fire isn't the only disaster you face. Buildings collapse regularly. The shoddy construction, the weight of too many floors, the landlord's refusal to maintain anything. One day, the whole structure just gives way. You're walking down the street, and suddenly the building next to you crumbles. People are buried in the rubble. Screaming. Dying. And there's nothing anyone can do except dig through the debris and hope to find survivors. Floods are another problem. Rome is built on the Tiber River, and when it floods hard. The lower-lying areas, where the poor live, get hit worst. Water rushes through the streets, contaminated with sewage and debris. Your ground floor room fills with filthy water. Your possessions are ruined. Disease spreads in the aftermath. And the city just waits for the water to recede because there's no infrastructure to prevent or manage flooding. Then there are the riots. Political violence. Gang warfare. Sometimes sparked by genuine grievances, sometimes by bread shortages or chariot race outcomes. Mobs form. Buildings are vandalized. People are beaten in the streets. You learn to stay inside when you hear the crowds gathering. You lock your door and hope the violence doesn't reach your building. Living in Rome means living in a state of perpetual crisis. Disaster isn't an exception. It's the baseline. You're always one catastrophe away from losing everything. One fire. One collapse. One flood. One riot. And there's no safety net. No government that will help you rebuild. No charity that can support the thousands of people affected every time something goes wrong. So you live carefully. You're always alert. Always watching for smoke. Always listening for cracks in the walls. Always ready to run. Because in ancient Rome, survival isn't about thriving. It's about not dying today. And tomorrow, you'll face the same risks all over again. This is life in the empire. This is what it means to be expendable. To be one of the millions whose lives are so precarious that disaster is just part of the routine. You accept it because you have to. Because what choice do you have? You can't leave. You can't change the system. You can only try to survive one more day. And hope that today isn't the day everything burns down. So here we are. You've made it through a day in ancient Rome. Or more accurately, you've read about what it would be like if you somehow survived a day in ancient Rome. Because let's be honest. You wouldn't survive. Not really. Not as the person you are now, transported into that world with no preparation, no connections, no resources. This is the part where we talk about what Rome actually was. Not the myth. Not the marble and glory and triumphant legions. But the reality. The Rome that existed for the vast majority of people who lived there. Rome was a machine. A vast, grinding machine that consumed human lives to produce wealth and power for a tiny elite. The senators. The patricians. The emperor and his court. They lived in unimaginable luxury. Mansions with dozens of rooms. Gardens and fountains. Imported delicacies from across the empire. Servants attending to their every need. That was their Rome. Your Rome, the Rome of ordinary people, was completely different. It was cramped, dirty, dangerous, and exhausting. You worked until your body broke. You ate barely enough to survive. You lived in constant fear of disease, fire, crime, and economic disaster. You had no political power, no legal protections worth mentioning, and no hope of ever improving your situation. You were born poor, you lived poor, and you died poor. That was the deal. And the thing is, Rome knew this. The elite knew exactly how miserable life was for ordinary people. That's why they provided bread and circuses. Free grain to prevent starvation. Spectacular entertainment to provide distraction. Keep the masses fed just enough and entertained just enough, and they won't revolt. It worked for centuries. The history we learn, the Rome we read about in books and see in movies, that's the Rome of emperors and generals. The Rome of military conquests and architectural marvels. And yes, that Rome existed. The Colosseum is real. The aqueducts are real. The roads that stretched across Europe are real. Rome's engineering and organizational capabilities were genuinely impressive. But those achievements were built on the backs of millions of people whose lives were brutal and short. The workers who died building the Colosseum. The soldiers who died in foreign wars. The people who lived in insulae that collapsed or burned. The children who died before age 5. The women who died in childbirth. The men who worked themselves to death. These people are the foundation of Roman glory. And history barely remembers their names. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Rome because you couldn't. Your modern body, accustomed to regular meals, medical care, and relative safety, would be shocked by the conditions. The hunger would overwhelm you. The disease would sicken you. The labor would exhaust you. The sheer brutality of daily existence would break you mentally and physically. But even if you somehow adapted, even if you became as hardened as the Romans themselves, you'd still be trapped in a system designed to exploit you. You'd work every day just to afford the minimum necessary for survival. You'd watch people die around you constantly. You'd see the inequality, the injustice, the casual cruelty, and there would be nothing you could do about it. Because you're not a citizen with rights. You're not a person with agency. You're a resource. Expendable. Replaceable. This is what empire looks like from the bottom. Not glory. Not civilization. Not triumph. Just grinding poverty, endless labor, and early death. The Roman Empire, for all its achievements, was fundamentally built on human suffering. On a system that treated most people as less than human. As tools. As fuel for the machine. And yet people survived. Millions of them. They woke up every day, faced impossible odds, and kept going. They found moments of joy in festivals and baths. They loved their families. They maintained dignity in the face of degradation. They were human beings living human lives, even when the system tried to reduce them to nothing. That's perhaps the most important thing to understand about ancient Rome. It wasn't just emperors and gladiators. It was people. Ordinary people trying to survive in extraordinary circumstances. People who deserve to be remembered, even though history forgot most of them. People whose struggles and suffering made possible the civilization we still admire today. So when you think about ancient Rome, think about them. The worker hauling grain. The woman fetching water. The child dying of fever. The family sleeping in a single room. The person going to bed hungry. The millions whose names we'll never know but whose lives mattered just as much as any emperor's. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Rome. But they did. Day after day, year after year, generation after generation. Not because they were stronger than you. But because they had no choice. And that's the truth about the Roman Empire. It was built not on strength or virtue or destiny. It was built on necessity. On the desperation of people who had nowhere else to go and nothing else to do but survive. That was Rome. The greatest empire in the ancient world. And the worst place most of its people could imagine living. Both things were true at the same time. And that's the story that deserves to be told.